While thousands of people flooded the streets of D.C. today to once again protest the president's deployment of National Guard troops and takeover of D.C. police.
And the president is threatening to send immigration officers and the National Guard to Chicago. He's expected to order troops and ICE agents to the Windy City in an attempt to carry out mass deportations and crack down on crime.
What President Trump is doing is unprecedented and unwarranted. It is illegal. It is unconstitutional. It is un-American.
What happens when the so-called leader of the free world starts looking more like an occupied state? Imagine this. In the heart of Washington, D.C., churches are ringing their bells like it's wartime. Federal troops are patrolling American streets, not in some foreign country, but right in the capital of the United States. Protesters aren't just marching anymore. They're rising up in what looks like the spark of a genuine rebellion. And the world is watching, stunned, as America, the nation that once preached democracy to everyone else, turns those same tactics of military control on its own citizens. But here's the twist most people don't see coming. While the U.S. tears itself apart from the inside, another country is quietly positioning itself to take advantage. Investors, CEOs, even world leaders are already asking the same question. If America can't guarantee stability anymore, then who can? And the answer, to the shock of many, is pointing north. Because while America burns in chaos, Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, is playing a completely different game. A game of stability, opportunity, and global leadership. And if you think this is just another protest story, you're wrong. What's happening right now could mark the beginning of the biggest power shift in North America in nearly a century. Washington, D.C. looked less like the capital of a democracy and more like the capital of a failed state. Tens of thousands of furious Americans poured into the streets, not just chanting slogans, but ringing church bells in defiance, turning the city into something that felt like a war zone. The sound echoed across the Capitol, bells clanging against the thud of military boots on pavement, against the roar of armored vehicles rolling down familiar neighborhoods. But what made these protests truly explosive wasn't just their size, it was their nature. This wasn't some carefully organized campaign led by a national movement. These demonstrations were raw, organic, and spontaneous. No leaders, no central command, just citizens rising up in real time against the presence of federal troops. And that terrified Washington more than anything else. Because when resistance isn't staged or scripted, it can't be easily crushed. The symbolism was impossible to miss. Citizens standing against soldiers in their own capital, churches openly siding with protesters against government authority. For centuries, religious institutions were the backbone of American communities. Now, they were ringing alarm bells against their own government. This wasn't just political disagreement. It was legitimacy itself cracking in broad daylight. And as shocking as it was, this was only the beginning. Because while Washington was burning with defiance, another city, hundreds of miles away, was about to become ground zero for something even darker.
If Washington looked like an occupied capital, then Chicago looked like a battlefield waiting to explode.
More than 300 federal agents had set up shop inside Naval Station Great Lakes, transforming it into a forward operating base. From there, convoys rolled into the streets at sunrise, clashing with protesters who had already learned their routes. By 6:30 in the morning, unarmed citizens were already in place, blocking federal convoys before they even left the base. This wasn't reaction anymore. This was organization. Protesters were tracking movements in real time, staging counteractions with precision. It was less like protest and more like resistance infrastructure. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker didn't mince words. He called it what it was, an illegal occupation of his state. And then, he did something no modern governor had dared. He openly defied Washington. He invoked the Posse Comitatus Act, arguing that federal troops had no constitutional authority to police Illinois streets. His message was clear. Federal agents might defend government property, but they would not rule Illinois. And then came the real shock. Chicago police were ordered not to cooperate with federal agents. No shared intelligence, no logistical support, no joint task forces. Federal forces were now blind, operating in a hostile city without allies, trying to run missions in the dark. Every operation grew more costly, every clash more damaging, every convoy more exposed. The result? Viral footage of federal convoys being stopped by ordinary citizens in the streets of Chicago. Scenes that looked eerily similar to footage from Baghdad or Caracas, except this was the American Midwest, and the message to the world was devastating. If America couldn't even control its own cities without unleashing military force, what did that say about its future as a superpower?
The images spread faster than Washington could control them. Viral videos of troops in D.C. and Chicago flooded global news cycles. European outlets compared it to Eastern Bloc crackdowns. Asian broadcasters questioned whether America was even a reliable partner anymore. The so-called defender of democracy looked less like a global leader and more like a fractured empire collapsing in real time. For decades, the United States had sold itself as the safe bet, the one country that guaranteed stability, democracy, and order. But now, its capital looked occupied, its states looked defiant, and its people looked ready for revolt. And when foreign investors and world leaders looked at those images, they didn't just see politics. They saw risk. They saw instability. And they began to quietly ask a dangerous question. If America can no longer guarantee stability, then where can we turn? And here's where the story flips, because while America was consumed by chaos, its northern neighbor was playing a completely different game. While Washington burned, Ottawa was branding itself as the grown-up in the room. Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled a doctrine he called "from reliance to resilience," a signal to the world that Canada was no longer betting its future on America's stability. Instead, it was building its own. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Carney's government launched a $5 billion strategic response fund, not for emergency bailouts, but for long-term investments. New Arctic ports, critical minerals development, digital infrastructure projects, all designed to attract global capital and talent. To investors across Europe and Asia, the message was clear. While the United States was burning political capital to police its own cities, Canada was laying out the red carpet for businesses, innovators, and engineers. Multinationals who once looked to Silicon Valley or Wall Street were suddenly looking north, to Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. It was the kind of opportunistic expansion that only works when your rival is too distracted to fight back. And at this moment, America was so divided, it wasn't even looking. The contrast between the two countries became even sharper at the border. In America, airports looked like checkpoints. Immigration officers treated even business leaders with suspicion. Travel restrictions and deportations scared away the very talent the U.S. once depended on. Canada saw an opening. Carney's government streamlined immigration for skilled workers and investors, sending a simple but powerful message. The talent America rejects, Canada will embrace. And the results came fast. Early data showed multinational companies who once saw Texas or California as their obvious landing spots were now touring Canadian cities. For global CEOs, it wasn't just about taxes or wages anymore. It was about stability. And at that moment, Washington couldn't guarantee it. Meanwhile, Ottawa was promising calm, clean, and predictable governance. Families and business travelers alike compared images of chaos in American streets with glossy tourism campaigns from Canada. And the choice looked obvious. But Carney's play wasn't only about immigration or business. He had his eyes on something much bigger. Something that would reshape Canada's place in the world. While America obsessed over migrant caravans at its southern border, Canada was quietly securing the north. Melting ice in the Arctic was opening up new shipping lanes, new trade routes, and massive untapped resource fields. And Ottawa moved quickly to lock them down. Every new port built in the Arctic, every northern mining contract signed, was another piece of leverage Canada gained in global politics. While Washington was distracted by protests and domestic chaos, Canada was securing long-term dominance in one of the most strategically valuable regions on Earth. It was a silent power play. No speeches, no dramatic declarations. Just contracts, construction, and control. And it gave Canada something priceless. Leverage in a world where stability was collapsing elsewhere. But Canada's rise wasn't only economic. As the U.S. military turned inward, consumed by domestic crackdowns, Canada began quietly expanding its global role. Financial markets told the story before politicians did. The Canadian dollar climbed steadily, while the U.S. dollar slipped. Corporations rerouted supply chains north, moving shipments through Vancouver, Halifax, and Montreal instead of New York or Los Angeles. Every container diverted was another sign that America was losing its grip on the world economy. And when it came to defense, the shift was just as clear. With U.S. forces tied down at home, Canada stepped up in NATO missions, Arctic patrols, and peacekeeping operations abroad. Allies that once relied on Washington began quietly leaning on Ottawa, not to replace the superpower, but to provide what the superpower could no longer offer: predictability. Canada wasn't just benefiting from America's collapse. It was preparing to inherit its partnerships, its investments, and its influence. And in boardrooms across the world, the conversation had already begun. Maybe North America's real anchor wasn't Washington anymore. Maybe it was Ottawa. So, here's the reality. America, once the unquestioned superpower of the Western world, now looks like a country at war with itself. Federal troops patrol its streets, governors openly defy Washington, and allies abroad watch in disbelief as the so-called defender of democracy turns inward, consumed by its own chaos. The economy is shaking, the dollar is slipping, and the image of stability that once made America untouchable is cracking wide open. And while all of this unfolds, Canada is moving in the exact opposite direction. Prime Minister Mark Carney is rolling out long-term investments, opening doors for talent, locking down the Arctic, and branding Canada as the safe, predictable partner the world desperately needs. Multinationals are shifting their money north. Families are choosing Canadian cities over American ones. And global leaders are beginning to see Ottawa, not Washington, as the steady hand on the continent. This isn't just politics. It's a tectonic shift. A once-in-a-century moment where one nation collapses inward and another quietly steps into its place. For the first time in 80 years, it's not America setting the tone for North America. It's Canada. But here's the question that no one can answer yet. Is this transformation permanent or just temporary? Is Canada truly rising as the new democratic leader of the continent? Or is this just a fleeting moment, born from America's chaos, that will disappear once the storm passes? One thing is certain. The balance of power in North America will never look the same again. So, what do you think? Is Canada ready to take the mantle of leadership while America unravels from within? Or is this just a passing illusion, destined to collapse with the next election? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your take on this historic shift. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is only just beginning.